Welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. I'm your host, Sam Snelling. With me on your right, if you're watching us on YouTube, is Matt Watkins. We're here to talk all about the Missouri basketball Tigers, even though it's not a super fun subject to talk about these days. We're in the midst of season 7 of Dive Cuts. Dive Cuts has done a very good job of chronicling quite a bit of bad basketball in its days. Although, like, I will stop short of kind of saying that what we see is a bad basketball team. I don't think that they're a bad basketball team. I think they're an incomplete basketball team that has enough good elements to be competitive, not enough to win games. And it's really kind of led us to basically watch the same performance again and again and again and again, where they come out, they, play competitive basketball. They cannot get it done down the stretch. What say you, Watkins? Welcome to the pod, by the way.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a couple weeks. I think the last time I was on, it was the two Matts. So it's been a while since the two of us have been on. But when you're talking about the basketball team just now, I was thinking about the horse meme, the drawing of the horse. Have you ever seen that, where it's like beautiful and then it just kind of gets progressively worse? And I kind of think of that as how the games go for Mizzou right now. Mm-hmm. It may not be perfectly linear, but with 8-10 minutes left in a game, every game you're thinking, oh, Mizzou's looking pretty good. They're going toe to toe with whoever the opponent is. And then the last 8 to 10 minutes are it's the same thing over and over again. And there's different reasons game to game why it falls apart, but it falls apart. So
it's always something. So my kind of like working theory, and I've written about this in study hall a couple times, is basically like, and this reminds me, honestly, like of some of, like Consul Martin's teams, particularly in the second year there, where, where they lost Jonte Porter. And then again, not so much as last year, because that was a bad team. But in year 3, where they just had some kind of rough injury luck, but I feel like in order for this team to win, it needs like positive performances from 4 guys. And, it's Sean East, Tamar Bates, Noah Carter, and Nick Honor. And they have not gotten like 4 quality games from all those guys at the same time in a while. There are games where Noah Carter plays well and then Nick Honor doesn't. Sean East had a couple games where he was struggling. Tamar Bates has clearly been the breakout guy recently. He's not the problem. So it really kind of comes down to these other 3 guys, and they just can't get on the same page. And like, we're all going to play well in this game, and that's going to be enough for them to win, because at this point, like, and pointing out like the luck factor with Ken Pomeroy, and I don't know if you read most recent study hall, but I checked it up. They're like 358th or something like that in luck. Last year they were 10th. And I mean, we can explain that a little bit. It doesn't necessarily mean that like you can't calculate luck. What it is it's sort of like how you measure against the predicted record, because you have a 58% chance to win a game, a 42% chance to lose. How often are those results, evening out? And if they're even, the model is predicting your record correctly, your luck is even. If you're over, like Missouri was last year, they were, 3 or 4 wins in the plus column. So their luck was really good this year. Their luck is really bad. And I think it basically just kind of comes down to those 4 guys just not really being able to be in sync all at the same time.
Yeah, and to kind of put a point on that, regarding the luck factor, if you were to look at Pomeroy's rating of Mizzou going into each of the last 7 games, it's basically been unchanged. They're sitting at that somewhere between 100 and 115, 100 and 115th in the country. And you lose and you don't move. You lose, you don't move. And the thing is like you look at what the expectation is, as you mentioned, but it's also about how close the games were, and when you look at the overall record, the teams with worse luck have performed better than their record according to the model, and the teams with the best luck at the top of the rankings have, they're getting more wins than expected. That's basically how you look at it. And
it's like Ole Miss and South Carolina are two teams that are in the top 25 of luck factor.
Right. And Mizzou was incredibly high last year because they won all of these close games, and the games they lost were blowouts. But to the point as to why, I mean, we wrote about this early, even before the season started, that this was the margins were thin. It was doable with the roster that they had put together. But if even with a full roster, if any of those pieces weren't working as expected, the margins were so thin that you could see how this goes south. But now that, even in the latest game Saturday, they were missing John Tonje, Caleb Grill, Trent Pierce, Anthony Robinson, and of course, Caleb Brown's been out all year. So when you already have a fine margin and you start taking pretty big chunks of that away, you've got two possible starters, you've got two rotation players, and you remove them from the equation, that puts a lot more pressure on guys that can't really handle that pressure statistically to make up for the deficits. And, Sean East and Tamar Bates have been frankly incredible, much better than I would have expected them to be. But even then, that's still not enough because you've taken away so much. And that's just to be, NIT 20 win level team. And what we're seeing now is just falling short of that. And for the same reasons, day in, day out. And that's why they sit at 0-7. It's not exciting. No one wants to hear it, but that's just the fact of the matter. The pieces are performing about the level that you'd expect them to based on what's available to be on the floor,
Well, so last week, now that we've kind of had a general recap, clearly they lost both their games last week. The first loss was to Texas A&M, and that game was a little unusual for for some of these Missouri games because like their defensive game plan, which is something I think we could all kind of quibble with at a time here and there, but they had a really terrific defensive game plan. The approach of switching to a 1-3-1 zone, really taking away A&M's advantages as far like in some of their ball screen coverages, which they like to really run a lot of ball screens. They would like to get Wade Taylor going downhill, try to get the ball in his hands a lot, and basically switching to a zone kind of removes that. The problem though is A&M is also a really tough physical defensive team, and Missouri could not do the important part of basketball, which is make any shots. They only scored 57 points in what was not the lowest output of the year, guys. That was against Memphis. But it was the lowest in SEC play by a good margin. And overall, it was just like it really it felt like they had so many opportunities. And I feel like this is where we kind of get into, I put in the deck a study hall today, like, well, it's Groundhog Day again. Because there's like every game, like the script is different, but like, as far as how you arrive at the finished product is the same though, right? So like how they lose is different each time. But the method, the way that they do seems to be the same every time.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of truth to that. It's with Mizzou on last Tuesday. They got off to a 10-point lead, and then ended up giving up like a 25-2 run or something like that over the course of 15 minutes, where Mizzou just couldn't score. It was frustrating, and then Mizzou kind of pulls it back in before halftime, goes on a little run, keeps it close through the 10-minute mark, and then they don't have the juice to get it done. And as to your point on the defensive game plan, I thought it was very intelligent. Someone who watched it may say, well, they gave up a bunch of open threes. Well, that's exactly what you want to do against A&M, a team that shoots something like 26%, bottom 10 or 15 in the country. Yielding open shots to that team is not bad defense. Taking away,
yielding also to the right guys too. Right. Taylor is a guy who's going to shoot the ball a lot, but he wasn't getting a lot of open, clean looks. Like was Jace Carter, Anderson Garcia. Those guys want to shoot.
Had a few shots too, but was not connecting. So that's something I think you'll live with compared to what he could be doing. So, it's
23-2, by the way, was the run.
What was that?
23-2 was the run.
Close. I'd say
they came out. It was 13-4, and from there it was a 23-2 run. So it was 27-15 from 13-4.
Not good.
Oof. Yeah, that's but again, to their credit, they find a way, and I think like part of this is, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit at the jump, which is, needing those four guys, but you can't play them every minute. I mean, Dennis Gates has tried to play them as much as possible, but when you take guys out, and sometimes we'll look up and the lineup is like Nick Honor and Ant Robinson and like Kurt Lewis and like Aiden Shaw, and you're like, who is going to shoot the ball? But this is part of the problem is, that without Tanji and without Grill, guys who are expected to be sort of fixtures of the offense, instead of having like 6, maybe 7 guys who you could, count on for offense, you're really down to, less than a starting 5.
Yeah, no, it's been a problem, and we saw that even jumping ahead to last Saturday, with even more absences. You question the lineups, but you realize Dennis Gates is playing 9 players and there's no one else. That's the allotment of players that he has on the bench. So,
well, we could talk about, a little bit more about the South Carolina game because, that is a little bit fresher on the mind.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't think South Carolina is all that good. They've got some guys who can make threes. The thing that Paris has done well, and this is also what Dennis Gates did a lot last year, is he's forced teams into playing the game that he wants to play. Mm-hmm. We said that, after their first matchup in Columbia, that it was South Carolina's pace. It was how that they wanted to play. It was disjointed. There was very little flow, and they're comfortable playing that style. That's a very Wisconsin trait, as I would say, and it's a program that you're fairly familiar with. What is it? Your in-laws are all Wisconsin grads.
I'm very familiar with their game.
And overexposure to Badger basketball, if you ask me. But there is, you can see so much of that lineage in South Carolina and how they play. And much like the Badgers, really, they seem this year, they seem to be making all the key shots. They did it, in Columbia, Missouri, and then they did it in Columbia, South Carolina. And certainly, it's one of the ways that they beat, Kentucky. I mean, I guess at some point I'm going to have to become a believer because they're, what are they, like 5-2 in the league now? But, two of those wins are against Missouri, and they lost to Georgia at home. They got blown out by Alabama. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's tough for me because, I think all the people who are picking them 14th had very valid reasons for picking them last, including, me who picked them 14th, and I think you did too.
I probably did.
You just look at the roster and you can see them not being 14th. They weren't 14th last year, but a lot in the same way that Kim Anderson's Missouri teams, maybe they finished 13th, but they were still the worst team, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, I think it's clear that they're not the worst team. Vanderbilt's the worst team. Missouri and Arkansas are in the bottom with them. But it's still Talon Cooper was point guard for a bad Gopher team last year, and BJ Mack was leading scorer on a pretty mid Wofford team. Mm-hmm. Not even a good Wofford team. Wofford last year was kind of mediocre. It's helped that Michi Johnson has broken out, but you're rolling out starting five, Jesus Carolero Martin, Jordan Butler. These are guys that nobody before the season predicted those two guys were going to be in Missouri's top 8. Here they are starting a road game in the end of January.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, with South Carolina, I will give them a little bit more credit. I think their ceiling is relatively low, but they're a well-coached team. They do an incredible job of pulling teams into the style of play that they want to do, which is a tried and true Wisconsin trait. They're going to control the tempo, and if they control the tempo, they're going to drag you down and beat you. That's just what they do. They're a solid defensive, half-court defensive team. They know what they're doing. They control the gaps well. And one thing I'll point out is I was looking over the numbers, and if I'm remembering them right, I think Mizzou on Saturday had 20 points in transition, and South Carolina had 0. I know South Carolina had 0. It's not their game. That's not what they're trying to do. And Mizzou performed pretty well in that category. You take 20 points in transition on, I think it was 12, 14 possessions that you would love to have that. That's something that's been lacking with Mizzou, but that's just how much better South Carolina was in the half-court game than Mizzou was. And that's what they want to do. That's their MO. And they shot the ball really well. They hit some really tough contested shots. They hit some open shots, and that was the ball game. I think at one point Mizzou was getting outscored 30-6 behind the 3-point arc. You can't really overcome that if you're not elite at other things.
Players not named Michi Johnson were 10 of 18 from 3-point range. That's a good marker. Michi was 0 for 7. I think that's also kind of a frustrating part is, you kind of talk about some of the luck factors, part of getting lucky is really, South Carolina's best player having a bad night, shooting the basketball, and they got it. The only problem was nobody else did. Yeah. Talon Cooper was 2 for 3. BJ Mack was 2 of 5. Zach Davis 2 of 4. Jacoby Wright 2 of 4, and Morris Ugasuk, a freshman from I want to say the Netherlands or Norway. He was 2 for 2.
It's a strong Scandinavian name. I have no idea.
You what?
I said I have no idea if it is or not. I would suspect not, but I could be wrong.
He is not Finland. So he's from Finland.
Okay.
I believe his parents immigrated from somewhere in Africa. But he plays on like their junior national team.
That's some promise.
He looks like a prospect. I think has got some upside. I remember doing the preview, and we're getting a little sidetracked here. I'll bring it back quickly. But I like doing the preview for South Carolina. I like to watch video on all the newcomers. And I liked him. Like I didn't think he was a good guy who was going to step in and like start. But if you're looking for, a guy with skill who has good size, he shoots the ball well, clearly. I think that's a player that, you hope you can kind of stick around and after a couple of years, like you probably have your starting point guard. But it's unfortunate that I think Miles Studi is a little banged up and was sitting out. And so Morris got some PT, and he came in and of course didn't miss a shot, which, that would have been helpful. It probably would have helped Missouri's chances if the Finnish freshman maybe missed a couple shots. So
it goes.
Yeah, that's like, this is life for this team. But they were also without Trent Pierce and Anthony Robinson. The bench was shortened. Kurt Lewis, a guy who really has not helped them much at all since SEC play has hit. Had to play 15 minutes. I thought Vanover had a good night.
I'll since you brought that point up, I would say that I was pretty impressed with Vanover's game on Saturday, especially defensively. I know he's going to get absolutely roasted, and I'm bringing you a segue here for his on-ball defense late in the game, but that was entirely not his fault. Would you agree?
100%. Like, this is, and this is one of the things where, like, I understand that Missouri switches a lot, but there have to be situations where, like, you don't just auto switch, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a situation where you don't auto switch. And, like, I think to Vanover's credit, it looks like he's trying to communicate with, and it was Tamar Bates was the main culprit. It looks like he was trying to communicate to Bates that, a screen was coming, Vanover was in drop coverage. And this is, to me, I thought was like the bucket that put the game away. Like they set the ball screen to get the switch, and Vanover was in drop, and all Tamar Bates had to do was basically just quickly tag the roller and then get back to Cooper. And then we would have had a better defender on Talon Cooper in the waning seconds of the shot clock instead of, Vanover, who's just trying to use his size to deter a shot, but he just look, that's not who he is. Mm-hmm. Connor Vanover is not a guy you want defending guards on the 3-point line. Right. It's usually not going to go well. And if you realize
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, to elaborate on your point, is that you had sent some screenshots of watching the game, and the ball screen was being set quite high on the court. And you can see Connor Vanover yelling out that the screen is coming. And when the ball screen is set so high, and as you mentioned, Vanover's in drop coverage, which at this point was around the free throw line, and we're talking about a screen that's about halfway between the 3-point line and midcourt, that there's no reason not to just go under the screen. There's no reason to fight over the screen at that point, because he's not going to pull up and hit a 30 footer. He's not going to try, I should say. And then
if he does, like, that's a win for you.
Right. And then you also shared a shot of when the screen had taken place and he backed it out and he had Vanover one-on-one in the slot. And Vanover is once again communicating with both guards who are each marking a man to his right and left about re-switching.
Yeah.
It didn't happen, and Cooper just waited it out, and with probably under 5 seconds on the clock, predictably smoked him off the dribble. But, we're kind of getting sidetracked on that, but I just wanted to point out that aside from that play, Mizzou's rim defense in this game was great, and a big part of that was Connor Vanover. And I think I was looking at the numbers earlier, and South Carolina's rim rate was something like 25 to 30% below what they normally shoot as far as attempts at the rim. And there were points in time when Vanover would come in the game and either Mack or another big for South Carolina would get the ball in the paint. They'd look at him and just kick it. It was just completely shutting down their game. And once he came out, they would attack Jordan Butler, and Butler fouled out with 5 fouls. They knew to go attack him. And that's not a fault of Butler necessarily, but it's just the impact, the hidden impact that Vanover had in helping Mizzou stay in that game defensively.
Well, it's the difference between like a,
I was just going to say, is he an elite player? No, but he did what he was brought here to do defensively in that game. And the one play that people are going to remember is him getting absolutely smoked in a play in a defensive coverage that he shouldn't have been in.
Right. I was also going to say, like, as far as, because Butler fouled out in 13 minutes, I thought, other than that's not a good stat line, obviously. But I thought he played well when he was in. He did have a couple blocks. He was affecting shots to the rim. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also like, it's a very clear difference between Vanover, who's, 23 or 24 at this point, and a 19-year-old, who's still getting stronger and learning his body and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of, and I don't want to like say like this is like Mizzou fans, because it's always a very vocal minority of people who are very vocal on Twitter, and like I don't really read a lot of what's on Twitter, but as Rock'em Nation's kind of supposed to tweet sometimes, like I do kind of check in there, and like like the amount of people who say things and you're like, well, that's like the opposite of true about this team. Like I saw somebody was complaining about Gates taking out Tamar Bates right before the under 4 timeout. And I thought it was pretty common knowledge that when you have a good player and they've been playing the entire game, that you sub them out when you have an opportunity with a media timeout coming up, because it's going to get them whatever 20, 30 seconds of rest before the media timeout. They're going to get the rest in the media timeout. And so you're basically getting this extended rest period, and then you put them back in. And sure enough, like they went to the media timeout and Tamar Bates checked right back in. And it's just like, is that not common knowledge that this is a good way to use your substitutions?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're talking about a team that has so few players that are able to play right now, and Bates just carrying the team on his back for extended periods of time and logging such a heavy minute load. It's one thing to maybe not understand it, but college basketball is hard. It's very exhausting. No one wants to hear about players being tired, but fatigue is an issue, and even if you're not bent over at the waist panting, it still affects your play if your legs are starting to get a little jello-y, and the data backs it up. When players are tired, they don't shoot as well, and you have a guy who's a good shooter and a good offensive weapon. Wouldn't you want to get him a little bit of rest for the last segment of the game? I would think so, but everyone's entitled to their opinions. That's mine.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and a Twitter account where you can just say whatever you want. And, like it doesn't have to be true. Like it can just be completely made up. I was actually going to pull it up because I believe, so Tamar Bates played 36 minutes against South Carolina. And I believe he was at 18 or 19 minutes for the second half. Stat broadcast is not loading at the minute, so I'm not going to be able to look at the. Oh, is this? That is not. Yeah, that should be South Carolina, Missouri. Maybe they reset it. Usually, you can kind of go back and still pull everything in. On Stat Broadcast. I don't know if anybody's aware of that. If you use Stat Broadcast, there's a little trick. You can actually go into MizzouStats.com and pull up the calendar and pick the game, and everything is usually still there. Not the case for this game, though.
It's a conspiracy.
Well, it does. I think what happened though is it looks like South Carolina reset something because this is South Carolina women's game. This is thrilling podcast stuff right now. Let me tell you. Well, so let's turn the page and let's look ahead, because this week is either redemption week or really, really brutal week. On Wednesday, we're recording this Monday, January 29th. I don't think I've said that yet. On Wednesday, Missouri welcomes in the Arkansas Razorbacks. Watkins, the Hogs are a mess. And as I want to be able to, I really wish Missouri was better, because I want to be able to relish in the fact that they're just an absolute mess. Mm-hmm. I think you pulled it up, Missouri and Arkansas are neck and neck in the KenPom race.
Yeah, I think
one of those teams. Oh, go ahead.
I think the last time I looked, it was over the weekend. One of them was 112 and one was 113. So back to back.
Well, Arkansas is still 112. Missouri is still 113.
There you go.
But they started 14th.
Right.
So they were 14th in KenPom at the beginning of the year, and they have nearly fallen 100 spots. I am honestly very surprised. As much as I dislike Eric Musselman, it's kind of the same thing with Bill Self, where I don't like the guy at all, but I really respect him as a coach. He's clearly proven, through the years that he can coach. Muss, a little bit of the same thing, not quite at Self's level, quality-wise, because I don't know that Self has ever had a year go sideways like this. And this is really we looked at it, and they're a team where Muss was kind of going back to what worked for him in the first few years at Arkansas, and he was moving away from kind of that prep model of adding all the 5 stars. And he's like, I'm just going to go do what I'm used to doing, and we're going to hit the portal. And it just has not worked at all. They are so bad defensively. I am shocked at how bad they are defensively. They did have a good start to the Kentucky game. They came out. A lot of that was just the Cats were missing some shots. So they're coming off. They are 1-6 in league. They did beat Texas A&M at home in what might have been one of the worst defensive game plan, or not game plans, but play plans. I don't know what A&M was doing on that final play. They basically just let Tremont Mark walk the ball to court and drive it to 7-8 feet and take a little shot, and they made it. But that's their only win. They've been blown out by Auburn. They lost to Georgia by 10. They got blown out by Florida. They lost to South Carolina at home by 13. They got blown out by Ole Miss. It was close against Kentucky. But this seems like a team that could really, really go downhill in a hard way. And I don't really think you see that with Missouri. So
yeah,
what's your
the way
take
I
on
see it is I see Mizzou as I can point to the reasons why they're not good, and they all make sense in my mind. I cannot do that with Arkansas. They should be better than they are. They're really bad. And they have the talent to be a much better team, but they are not that. And it makes you wonder if there's some off the court stuff going on. I think there probably is. It just has all the makings of a team that is not gelling and is not on the same page and is. I'm not saying giving up. I don't ascribe that to anyone, but they are not clicking on all cylinders. They're clicking on very few cylinders, as a matter of fact. They're much less than the sum of their parts.
Well, yeah, I mean, Missouri fans are obviously very familiar with Trevor Brazile. He was not at the arena for the Kentucky game. It doesn't look like he is necessarily participating in the program. Devo Davis has reportedly stepped away from the program, and these are Davis in particular is a guy who was a fixture and has been a fixture. For Arkansas now for this is his fourth year. I remember that he when he signed Chandler Lawson, I didn't really think Chandler Lawson was going to help them a lot, and then very early in the season, Lawson was starting. And I was like, well, that can't be good for the other guys that he brought in. They have some guys who shoot the ball well, but overall, they do struggle to make shots. But I think Arkansas has never really been under Muss a really good offensive team. They made their name by defending, and this team pull up the KenPom profile here. 91st in defense. I think if you look at their history, they were 57th his first year, 10th, 11th, 17th, and now 91st.
There's just not something right there. Something's off.
It's surprising, because that is the one thing that you can kind of control, right? And you're not able to control it. So I don't know if, the Kentucky game and not having a couple of personalities, maybe Davis and Brazile were part of the problem, and not having them will help Arkansas be more cohesive. They definitely look like they're, playing with effort against Kentucky. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens when they come into Mizzou Arena. I think straight up, Missouri needs a win, but so does Arkansas. It's a projected win for the Tigers. There's not many of those left on the schedule. The only other one is at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, it's a big week for Mizzou. Obviously, winning these two games isn't going to be the difference between a good season and bad season, but it would do them well to see the win pop up in the column. I feel as if they're kind of fighting it. We've talked about the late game issues, just getting that positivity going back, and who knows? I don't think they're going to make a strong run at the end of the year, but you don't get a draft pick for finishing last in the league, so you might as well win the games that you can.
Right. And it certainly looks like they're heading, for a Wednesday appearance in the SEC tournament. I think we had all kind of hoped that those days would be behind them. but I feel like I've kind of said this multiple times, but I do wonder how much of, maybe this is something that we can get more into the off season. But I wonder, like, how many fans, college basketball fans, are ready for this like new era where the possibility that you have a great coach and you have a really bad season is a lot higher than it used to be. The SEC is loaded with great coaches, loaded with programs that spend in name, image, and likeness. And if you get one or two things wrong, and I think Missouri did this last offseason, and not just a couple things wrong, but then you also have a couple key injuries. It's basically takes you from being like, oh, like we could NIT, maybe NCAA tournament, to going, 2-16 in a hurry. So I think like it's worth some thought. It's worth some discussion. I think probably this off season, I think we're kind of up against it time wise. Do you have any thoughts you want to throw out on that before we get out of here?
No, I 100% think you're right. I had some questions about Mizzou's spring portal last year, as you well know. But when I saw the pieces come together, I looked at it and like, there's a decent possibility this could work. There's a possibility it couldn't work. It erred more towards the latter, and then you start plucking pieces away from that, and that's how we've ended up where we are now. It's not a mystery. If you had told me before the year this is how it's going to go, if you showed me who's participated and what they're doing, I would not have been optimistic in the least. This is
If I told you in September that Missouri was going to start Zeus and Jordan Butler at South Carolina, your thoughts were probably like, well, things are not going very well.
Well, not only that, but if you're starting Tamar Bates, who I would have never expected to be this good. I saw him as a rotation player for sure, but I saw him behind a guy like Caleb Grill or John Tonje, who were experienced at playing at this level. Granted, Mountain West, some may scoff at that, but the Mountain West is a legit league.
It's going to be like a 5 or 6 bid league this year.
I mean, it's better than the ACC in my opinion. But anyway, getting back to the point, if you had told me that was the lineup, I would not have known what's going on. And unfortunately, we know why that's the case now. So, in the portal era and what I'm writing this extended thesis on that's coming in the next couple weeks, I'm not down on Dennis Gates. There's always questions that you're going to have about any new coach, and those are fair. But this year, just, if they were to have won 16, 17 games, or if they win 10, it doesn't really change my outlook going forward that much. It is what it is. The fact that they're remaining competitive counts for something. It doesn't count for wins, obviously, but it's something you watch, that if they're coming out and doing what they can with what they have, there's something to be said for that.
I think it counts for culture, and I think that's one of the things that I remember. I think Fran Fraschilla was a guy who maybe tweeted something about it, when he visited the Mizzou campus in the off season, and just talked about, like the high level culture that Gates and his staff are building. And, and that is one of those things where, like keeping guys together and engaged when things are going wrong, because, it's very sort of easy to get down and to just sort of, not really feel like you have a chance. I think that's some of the things that we've sort of seen from Arkansas this year. Like, they get a little down and then it just, it becomes an avalanche. And Missouri in large part just hasn't really had that. They did take some bumps against Illinois. I think part of that was Illinois was looking for some revenge.
That's the one real game this year I can look at and say that they were not competitive in. Every other game you can look at it and say it wasn't for 40 minutes, but they were competing in this game.
Well, even like the Memphis game, like they just really, really struggled to make shots. And I think Memphis' size bothered them in a lot of ways, but I don't think that they were like uncompetitive.
Well, they were up like 14, 15 points in the first half, Mizzou was.
Right.
It's just,
sometimes you brick some shots and that doesn't go all that well. That's pretty much all I have. I do want to give you the opportunity to kind of plug your verdict pieces because the first one came out last Friday. Mm-hmm. The next part 2 is coming out this Friday. We're going to keep publishing every Friday. I think it's 4 parts.
4 parts, yeah.
Really interesting stuff, diving into like program building and all that kind of stuff. If you're looking for kind of light at the end of the tunnel, in a really pretty tough season, I think the verdict pieces are good. Anything else you want to say?
No, I mean it's that pretty much covers it. I'm not going to give away the whole game here, but it's 4 parts running each week for the next 4 weeks, 3 weeks, I guess. Looking at how Mizzou's trying to build a program, looking at some historical comps for it that makes sense, some problems that could arise in using that system, and then I kind of do a little analysis at the end of what my thoughts are on it, taking everything into consideration. So, it could read well, it could lift your spirits, it might not. It's what they're doing is kind of a throwback as we looked at in the first part, season 1, part 1. They're going to try and build through their high school recruiting, and that's would have never been considered a crazy theory 10 years ago, but now, that's somewhat unusual. So check it out. It's I broke it up. I could have put it into one long piece, but as the Netflix creators have figured out, no one's going to watch a 10-hour movie. But if you break it into 10 one-hour episodes, I'll watch that all at once.
Yeah.
So.
Well, good stuff. Yeah, make sure you check that out if you haven't already. Go back to Rock Nation. I believe it's still on the front page. But we're going to end this. We'll be back. Very clearly it's an important week for Missouri, a chance to kind of get a couple wins, realistic opportunities for wins. Arkansas is a mess. Vanderbilt is pretty bad. So are they going to go 2-0, 1-1, 0-2? What's your thought?
I think they have to get at least 1. I think they'll get 1. Maybe 2.
They're going to get 1.
I think the chances of 2 are better than 0.
I think I agree with you on that. And they do seem to play better on the road, so I'm hoping they're at least beat Vandy. Please beat Vandy. I could see like a really ugly game against Arkansas not going their way, but let's keep it positive. Let's get 2-0, and then we'll be back next week. If you're looking for something to do, you can head on down to 573s.com, 573tees.com /collection/rockm. Get your t-shirts. We got, I think, some more stuff coming out with that. Help support Missouri NIL efforts. That's where the money's going. And then we'll be back, or I'll be back, maybe with this guy, maybe with the other Matt, who knows. But we'll be back next week with more dive cuts. And until then, thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.